briefly introduce you who are we, what we are doing today here. We are international global platform for startups and investors, inmind.com. If you are not registered, you can come and visit our website and register there. What we are doing is that we are connecting startups and investors, and we are also supporting startups in different areas, such as marketing and expertise and preparation of the documents for the to make the presentations in front of the investors. So we are organizing recently. We are organizing a webinar, free webinar every week, and even this week it's our second webinar, because last time that when Fred joined us last week, the topic appeared to be very relevant for the startups, and we received some questions that we'll discuss today, that Frederic will answer today. So the topic of today's webinar is managing tech startup. So tech startup crash course, as you can see on the slide. And Frederic will speak about all the different stages and all the different things that technical startup should consider when managing the project, when just finding the team, managing the team, organizing the processes, how to do that, how to start it, how to proceed it, and which things you need to remember. And please feel free to ask questions, because Frederic is really an expert in this field. He has his company, Arcanys, and he will tell a bit more about it in a couple of minutes. But he has really great experience in this area, so just feel free to ask any questions that come to your mind concerning the topic, of course. And we already received a few questions from the users, from startups interested in this topic. So we will, of course, discuss these things today. So I'm giving the word now to Frederic. Frederic, please join us, and we are ready to start listening to your
hello
presentation
there.
To your webinar.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thanks for being here on a Saturday for this webinar for startups. So I will introduce you to the best practices of software development, and in particular, how to manage your tech team in a startup environment. But first, I would like to thank Katerina and Nelly from InMind for inviting me and organizing this webinar. For those who just joined us and don't know it yet, InMind is a platform that connects industry experts, mentors, and investors with global startups. I've worked almost a year with them, and they're very dedicated to helping both startups and investors, and with their case studies and expert advisory. So if you're not registered yet, I'd recommend you checking out the platform. And before we jump in, I'd like to mention to you that this webinar should be as interactive as possible, as Katerina just said. And so please ask your questions all along the way, and I'll try to answer them as much as possible. Okay, so let's get started. So I'll briefly introduce myself. It doesn't look so brief, but I promise I'll be quick, so that you understand why I'm talking about this topic today, especially for startups. So since 2010, we've worked with several hundreds of teams, and we've measured all the ways that teams could work more effectively. And so we also have witnessed a lot of startups that were bound to fail. And so over the years, we've perfected our model to make sure that we increase the chances of success of any project that we work on. So I'm born in Lausanne. I've worked in the finance industry for almost 10 years. We've been setting up operational IT and non-IT teams for strategic projects, first in Switzerland. And then I joined a company where I was doing consulting for a portfolio management system, where I analyzed financial and software performance for the 10 top private banks in Switzerland and in the US. Then I moved to Hong Kong to work on an e-commerce venture, selling virtual assets linked to online games. And there I managed parts of the operations, and I moved the company from Hong Kong to the Philippines, where I'm at now. And so today I'm the co-founder of Arcanys. We have about 120 people in the Philippines, including 80 software developers. And with Arcanys Labs, I'm also a partner with a VC firm for investments up to $200,000 in cash and services that we do with startups. And this has been going on for about 2 years. We have invested in six startups in Switzerland, in UK, in Thailand, in Australia, and we're looking to add about 5 to 10 startups this year to our portfolio. And we are partners with FinTech Fusion and the Swiss FinTech Association, where we actually mentor startups that are following their programs. And I also collaborate on one NGO here in the Philippines, where we do early math education for poor families, so about 1,500 to 2,000 families every year. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we've worked with several hundreds of teams since 2010. We've measured plenty of different ways to work more efficiently, and so we're really confident about the value we can deliver that we invest in startups, and where we know we can actually make a huge difference in the speed of the commercial development of the startup. So we're both investors and providing work for much later payment if the company is actually successful. So this means we're willing to take the risk of working along with a team to boost their chances of success with no direct payment. For example, one of the startups we have worked with, but unfortunately not invested in, has been sold to a bigger group for more than $10 million, and our team is at the core of their success because their team is bigger at Arcanys than in their offices in Sweden. And so now with this company, for example, we're increasing the collaboration that has purchased them, and because they've tried to outsource 3 times in the past and they've always failed. So the goal for us now is to prove that the problem is not with outsourcing, but it's how they manage their tech teams. And so another example is a startup we have invested in at their very start and have managed to create some traction, and the product good enough that they got funding for about $500,000 from 500 startups. I don't know if you know that famous VC fund. It's the Asian fund that invested in them, and now they're valued at about $5 million, which is actually a lot in the Asian market for startups. So we can prove that we have a repeated success. And first, I would want to ask you what is the main struggle with your tech today, or what are your questions related to the topic of the webinar today? And if you could write them in the chat, Katarina and Nelly will relay them to me, and I'll answer them either along the way or at the end of the webinar when it's the most relevant. Okay, so now let's dig in more details with the topic of the day. So basically, when you work in tech, there are 2 main things to look after. So it's the people, their roles, the knowledge, and how to manage them. And the second part is the processes, when to use them and how to use them. So let's start with the people. And so in technology, there are a lot of different roles. Some of them can be the same person, the ones you see on the list, but it's not the case for all of them. So I'll just briefly go through them so that you can better understand when I talk about someone later in the presentation, what I'm actually referring to. So first, we have graphic designers with UI or UX experience. So she's the person who will help define the look and feel of the application for the users and the admin parts. Then there's the business analyst, which is the person who will usually work before together with the designer to work on the requirements and the specifications of a project. So the BA's role is to understand the processes, map them, describe what users need, and help the designer, along with the founders, to come up with the features, look, and feel of the application. So once the requirements are known and validated, at least for the MVP, this is when the developers come into play. And I see a question from Katerina, who's asking how many developers are enough for a startup in an early stage startup. The answer usually depends on the size of the project, and so later down the presentation, I will actually explain to you the estimation process and how to evaluate the workload for either an MVP or for a new or for building new features of a product. And so, yeah, once the requirements are known and validated, at least for the MVP, this is when the developers come into play. And so the front-end developer is the kind of developer who will program the visible part of the application that users and admins will interact with. So while the back-end developer is the developer who will take care of the server and API sides where the heavy lifting of the application actually happens. And the developer that actually masters both skills is called the full stack developer. And a relatively new term is DevOps. So even more so with now the cloud technologies that are growing. And it's where the DevOps is a hybrid between a developer and someone who will also understand infrastructure, so QA, automation, hardcore cloud, or physical server issues. The architect is a high-level developer that makes software design choices and sets the technical standards, including coding standards, tools, and platforms. And usually this is the role of the CTO in a startup. He is the one who should be I mean, we think that the CTO should be a central person and even a co-founder in technology startups and the one designing the system and knowing most of the technology. And yes, full stack is a front end plus back end, Alexi. And one more thing is that testers, they're often forgotten, but actually they're really central to building a product because they're one of the guarantees of the reliability of the software when it's delivered. They are testing the application, but both on a user point of view and on a technical or performance point of view. To make sure that the applications are working as expected. So it's important to mention that the best is that the tester is a different person than the developer, simply because it's two different jobs and no developer is actually really good at testing its own code. And in some cases, there's a need for a project manager, but most of the time the role is at least with us, played by the lead developer. Because we think that every person in a technological project must be technical, and this is no exception for actually the project manager. Because the PM, as we call it, is usually adding a layer in a project and is prone to conveying misunderstanding. So we like to have this role blended with the lead developer as long as the team is not too big. And lastly, the product owner is the person who is in charge of the vision of what he wants to build and conveys that vision to the team. And usually this is the client or the founder. Question from Fred. Should the CTO in a tech startup be a tech person? Can someone else be a CTO without any coding skills? So the short answer is yes, it should be a tech person. And a CTO without any coding skills, it doesn't really won't really add so much value to startup. I will get back to that later in the presentation, where I actually explain what we think a coding CTO should have. All right, so let's jump to the next slide, where we're going to talk a little bit about the processes. And so there's usually a lot of processes to keep in mind. And at Arcanys, we have about 200 people, including on the client side, that are working at any given time on a project. And we have about 20 concurrent projects at the same time. So it means we really can't mess with the information, and we need to be in control of our projects and know what's happening at any minute and on a daily basis. But on a startup level, I think a few simple processes need to be in place to increase the chances of success, and I'll just go through them. The first one, and an extremely important one, is managing the requirements. And I will explain each one of them in more detail. The second one is working on the lean software methodology and how to be careful with this concept, because you can really go off track if you don't manage it well. The third one is estimating the features, and this goes back to the question from Katerina on how many developers are enough. That's the estimation who will tell us how many are enough depending on the timelines that you have and how much money you can spend. Then the fourth one is about creating an architectural design based on the specifications. This is where senior architect or the CTO should be involved. And then managing the team and the communication, and lastly, to never forget user and software testing. And so if you could tell me, maybe there's a process you're not following from the ones I've listed, and maybe if there's a reason why didn't you follow that? And if you're following the processes listed, is there any one that you're struggling with, and maybe why are you struggling with that process? And so let's dig in the requirements. From what we see, the number one risk factor is the mismanagement of the specifications and the business requirements. Everything is urgent in a startup, and of course you gotta get this MVP out to start getting traction and users. But when you build the tech, they're like fast and slow phases, and really some things can be rushed, even though the pressure to push something out is really high. So neglecting the requirements is one of the most costly mistakes we've seen over the years. And heads down to programming your product without thinking about the whole picture can really be deadly for a startup. And some founders also, really have a hard time to sit down and focus on the requirements. So here and there, they kind of have a bit of time, but they'd rather write a few lines quickly and ask the tech guy to price estimate and deliver something. And working on the first version of the product is the most important task. And it's even more important, actually, than raising money and finding clients. So every month we have to dig in projects that have not well been specified, and it's really a nightmare to fix these. Usually it's more costly than to actually start from scratch, but starting from scratch is slowing down the release of new features in the short term, and this can be really a problem when you're facing tough competition. And so again, the number one risk factor is the mismanagement of the specifications and the business requirements, and that's something you really, really have to keep in mind. So I have, I have three questions. What about agile dev in order to keep adjusting end users' needs with dev? Because if dev lasting long, then many discrepancies. Yes, and this is why agile is, we always work in agile in our case, and working in agile doesn't mean that you cannot ship a finished product at some time. And when you're building the MVP, you really have to ship something. The MVP is really the first version of your software that is supposed to match the needs of the users that you think you will have. And so you have to release that first version, and then you can start improving with iterations every 2 or 3 weeks and delivering new features and um, and uh, and then match the evolving needs of your client. So um, Agile is about delivering new versions of your software every now and then and keep on improving it. Sarah is asking what timelines should be applicable for MVP development of web app. Um, the faster the better, or should we focus on features and quality? Um, Usually what we see for MVPs, I would say it's 3 to 4 months of development time. Of course, the faster is better, but you shouldn't ship a product that is doesn't work either, because you will have a lasting impression on the user. So it's really a mix between the speed and the features and quality. I'll maybe explain a bit more later in the webinar. And what are the differences between Agile and Scrum, from Alexi? Basically, Scrum is a sub-version of Agile, of the Agile methodology. And for that, I mean, for many more details, I mean, we could have like a week of training based on those two terms. And I would recommend you basically you check on Wikipedia for if you have many more questions for that. Okay, slide number 8. And so for the requirements, I think building a house is a really good analogy when you're thinking about building your first product. And so we have clients who come with us to us with a one-pager of what they really want to build, such as the sketch on the left side you can see, and they're like, oh, how much will it cost and how much time will it take? And actually the question is like, what do you think? Does it look like a little hut in the jungle, or does it look like a big mansion with a swimming pool at the back? And at this stage, it's really in the eyes of the beholder. We don't know. There's too many uncertainties, and whoever gives the price and the timeline for this sketch is actually making a big mistake. And so if your requirements aren't clear, you're forcing your developer or your developers or your provider to make guesses on your behalf, as well as planning for you, changing your mind all the time until you have what you want. This really pushes you to a messy project that very likely will last much longer than you want. And if someone gives you a fixed timeline or even a fixed price, expect them to come back later with additional requests in terms of time or payment. So the price will go up and the project will take longer if it ever gets actually released, because also architectural design will have absolutely failed. So for us, after working on hundreds of projects, we simply don't work on projects where the specifications are poorly done. We always push our clients to work on their requirements by themselves, or with our guidance, or we completely work with them to finish them, because we have a team that actually does that. And Iman just shared a little ebook that I wrote that really might help you out in understanding how can you already do the first part to building your own requirements, and then go to a provider or your team member, your developer, and say, hey, this is what I want to build. And it's going to help you actually clarify what you want. Should startup founder write requirements by himself, or it's better to give this job to professionals? That's a question from Fred. And well, I think it's the job of the founder with people that can really help him out, because the founder is the one that is supposed to have the vision for his product. So the founder is the one who is going to give the direction, and some professionals are going to help him out, laying out and designing what he has in his mind. But the founder should be the one to actually know what the end result would be, and then professionals would be the ones to kind of direct him in the right direction. I'm just gonna. Okay, so to go also a bit further with Fred's question is like who do you need when you're building requirements? And basically, there are mainly three roles that matter when you're building requirements. So it's the designer, the business analyst, and the product owner, and sometimes also the potential user, but that's optional. And so those three people might not always be three different people because someone can fill two roles at the same time. And other stakeholders can also give their input and share their opinion, but you have to be careful because they should not always be listened to. And for example, a tester or a developer might think of technical problems to building the system and suggest things that make him comfortable and avoid things that he might find too hard to build rather than think about the best functionality for the user. And first you should come up with the ideal tool that you really want for your users, then you turn to your developers and ask them how much time they need to build each functionality. And so, for example, that's an example I like is you can think of Apple, where the products, they always start from a design perspective, and then they go to the engineers and this is what we want. You got to put that much power in it, deal with it, and come back to me when it's done. And and I will show you an example of UI UX design and requirements document. So that's just a very small sample, but once the requirements are well done, you should have something like wireframes or the final design, which is much better in maybe an interactive prototype and a simple written requirements document that describes the business rules and business logic behind your system. It's always important to understand that we could like understand when you press on a button, what does it actually do? We really need to understand the business logic behind it. And in this slide, you see that the designs also explain the flow between the screens and the actions from each button. And this is very important to describe to whoever it will work on your project. And most of the time when we receive requirements, the entire admin section is missing. And so most people only think about in the products about the end user facing application, but they always forget about all the management reporting features that you as a business owner actually should have. It looks like there's a little discussion between Max and Fred regarding the requirements and talking to developers on requirements. And this is why your requirements, at least for the MVP, should be extremely precise as well, because whatever is not clear is going to be interpreted by the developer. And so then 2 weeks down the road, if you don't have something that is extremely well defined, you're going to discover how they've understood what you have not clearly explained. And then so maybe the whole 2 weeks of that sprint, of that iteration, are not completely lost, but it can mean some wasted time for you and, of course, some wasted money. And then when we talk about an MVP, and that goes back to the question of Max and Fred, is that when you are about to launch an MVP, it's very important that you have all the decision makers agree on the design of your application, at least for the MVP. And you should probably also get feedback from a few prospects, but you also, again, you need to be careful about it. Most clients don't know too well what they actually need, and they will ask you a lot of additional features, and they might not even understand the technology, and they can't always imagine themselves using the software. So you might hear a lot of suggestions that sound good, but you must also be really careful about scope creep. So you probably, for the MVP, you probably need to decline most ideas in your MVP and stick to the core functionality that are needed for the first shippable product. And Roberto asked a question: could you please help us understand better UX issues? I have terrible problem with the UX because our developers don't understand the customer journey on the website. Okay. um, I think what I would need to know, and maybe Roberto, we can speak at a later time or another day in more details. I would need to see what is the UX of the requirements you have, because usually the designer should explain the customer journey on the website. The screens should be linked with flows between the screens. They explain each function, and when the user does one thing, then it goes there. It does another thing, it goes to another page. This should be clearly explained. It that's probably why they don't understand. I don't know. I don't know enough here to really tell you more about that. And but if we start concentrating too much on the specification, won't we lose time on the market? Well, it depends how much time you're spending on the specifications, but usually in our case, before we spend only 2 or 3 weeks working on the specifications and the design. So then it's ready for implementation, and usually we do this in an iterative process. So I don't think wasting 2 weeks is something that you should skip to get a good product out, because if you ship something that has not been specified, you might not even be able to ship it, because if there's no understanding on what should be coded, then you'll never have a product that is shipped on the market. We've seen it. So specifications, hands down, the most important process at the beginning and throughout the development process. Whatever is not done, it's a missed opportunity. My front-end developer is a student from ETH. He did the MVP, and after our demo launch, user can find necessary features. Roberto, this is why you don't you don't give this to students. Students usually they're not they don't have enough experience. They're probably very good technically or very interested in learning new things, but you can't entrust your business with someone who has no experience. So the discussion is ongoing. I would really love to discuss more about this, but I don't think I will have time. But I'm happy to actually. Let me do something. If any one of you wants to pick a time to discuss one of these days, you can simply click on that link and book a time with me, and we can go over your questions. It's great if you send me stuff ahead of time so I can have a look at it. And if you and I'm going to send one last thing. Maybe it's going to help you out also. If you want to send me information, here is also a link to an NDA, so that there's no problem when you share information with me, even if we do this before the call. And now I'm going to go to the next slide. I will just close the door of my office first. Okay. And we're going to talk a little bit about the lean software methodology for startups. And so usually it's a very good methodology. We hear a lot about it. Lots of people are saying, hey, go lean software methodology, blah, 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 and it's the thing. But you also want to be careful about using this for your MVP when you're tight in cash, and which startup isn't, except if it's Uber. And building the first version of your MVP is when you really need to sort out the design and the requirements and build a product you can ship and test within your timelines and your budget. And we know that budgets are not always extensible, and the competition doesn't actually wait for you. So When you have your first project and your first users, this is when you can work more easily with fast iteration about your product without necessarily planning for the next features. And this might help you get a better product if you have strong adherence to the principle and you manage to get rapid customer feedback. So those are the conditions you need to meet. And we've seen it happen with a few customers who were not that disciplined in various areas using the lean software methodology. And if we didn't put them back on track, they probably could have doubled their budget for the MVP. So with a lot of stuff developed for nothing, then they trash a lot of things when they change their mind. And so one good way to get initial validation is to integrate the design in a prototyping tool. They give a feel of the use of the app without actually coding anything. And so for us, we use either InVision or Proto.io. And okay, so now we talk about another very, very important process that most developers hate. And they usually, unfortunately, skip this step. So this leads to important project delays between what is expected and actually what really happens. And this is why you're like, oh, but my guys have been working for so long, and what's happening? I don't see anything coming out. And basically, if you don't do that process, it's a bit like telling your friends that you'll meet them at point B at a given time. But don't ever bother checking how to get there because you've never done it and no one ever has before, how much time it will take, and if there's traffic or not, and worse, with what means of transportation, you will go from A to B, and you just say you can do it in an hour. You have 99% of chances that you'll be late or that you will never make it. So first, estimating actually only works if the project is well defined because you need detailed specifications and the designs of the UI. And once you have your specifications, developers will break down the specifications, as you can see in the screen, in what we call user stories. So that should be chunks of work from 1 to 8 hours in general. If it's bigger than 8 hours, as you can see with like UI design, we also break down the UI design in user stories for our designers. It means that it can be broken down much further, and that or that the understanding of the task is enough, and so it needs to be further clarified with the client. And so this process usually takes a lot of time. We spend 2 or 3 days on average with to do estimations, but it really saves so much time down the road that it's really the best way to start. And so also knowing how much time each feature takes allows you to better plan and prioritize how your application is going to be built. So, and one thing is that the end result will always shock you in terms of how many hours it will take. And actually this is normal because we always think things will go quicker than they actually do. And so my question to you guys is, have you gone through this process, or if not, is there anything that prevented you from doing it? And if you haven't done it, have you encountered delays or other issues in your product that you think the estimation and breaking down of user stories could have helped you avoid? Yes, Alexi, you you are right, but even when they do estimations, they're a bit they're usually a bit late because it's estimating is very difficult, even for a very experienced developer. They get better with time, but it's very hard. So in our case, we're between plus and minus 20% of what they've estimated, which is actually very small in terms of variation in time. But as an owner of your project, you have to really insist in specifying, estimating, asking them what their assumptions are, because that's how you're going to understand if they really have understood. Well, Max, They can sometimes be on time, and it's about communicating well with developers as well. I'll explain a little bit later how we avoid our we avoid delays. Alexi has a question. Can you please tell us your advice how to avoid delays in deadlines? Maybe agree for some penalty for every day of delay and consider it in the contract. So we have a lot of clients that ask us that question, and we wouldn't work with penalties for delays, simply because it's a shared responsibility when you're working with partners. So we try to never work in a relationship where we simply software providers, and then you do your job and you don't talk to your customer and that's it. It's very important that at the beginning of a project, you have a very clear understanding of what is expected. And I understand that it is very important for you to be on time, and so it's your responsibility to make sure that you have given all the tools to your provider to do a good job. And also agree on a communication channel when you see that there's problems. I mean, your provider should tell you when they see problems down the road. And developing software is not just like how can I say that? Getting something that is done in a supply chain that is known. Every time someone's building a software, there's unknowns, right? So it always will happen that there's problems down the road, and it's about discussing with your client what should be prioritized first. Your provider, what should be prioritized first, and then when there are problems, how do we deal with them? It's really someone helping you to build your business. You have to have a real partnership with them, and this is why you actually have to be extremely thorough in your analysis of when you choose a provider. And I will send you a bit later another ebook on how to pick the right provider for you. There's no. The best way to avoid delays in deadlines is excellent specifications, thorough estimation process, and open communication with your provider, because you are building something together. And I think that penalties, you also might risk your own business by putting penalties, because they will start to cut corners, and they will start building crap for you, and you don't want to pay for that. I could talk for hours about this. I think we could have another webinar on how to manage delays and deadlines in software development projects. So let me just find the next slide. I hope I answered your question, Alexi. So again, for those estimations, so estimation is really for alignment and prioritization. And besides forcing the breakdown of a complex project into smaller, more manageable tasks, it also helps the client validate the features and the product if they have been well understood. So when a provider gives you an estimation, you have to double check everything that they are saying that they will build. Whatever is missing in the document they will send you is probably something that they've forgotten or they have not understood, and you have to get back to them and say, hey, I asked this, and that. Are you going to do it or not? And then you have to make sure it's understood. Of course, it also allows to separate the project into phases depending on your budget. As I mentioned earlier, most of the time business people do not realize how much time each of the functionalities they have in mind really takes. So this estimation also makes you helps you make smarter business decisions. And if they don't have access to this information, they'll keep on throwing ideas and thinking they're all quickly done and that each one of them takes more or less the same time to accomplish. But in reality, some features might take 20 hours to build and some others might take 200 hours. But once you give the visibility to the product owner, then they business people can assign dollar amounts to the functionality and decide what to remove and what to keep for later. So I have two more questions. Who pays more attention to deadlines normally, outsourcers as external providers or developers in-house? I think outsourcers or developers in-house. I don't know. I mean, in our case, I think we really take care about the deadlines, because for us, if we mess up in a project, it means that we're not able to work on the long term with our clients, and everyone's winning when you're working on the long term with someone. So that's why we have such a tight control on the projects we run, and I will explain that to you later on how we can make sure that we always are in check with what we do. And a question from Serge, is it an issue to work with a faraway company like yours, or no need of physical contact for projects? Or do we need to have a local supplier to ensure implementation is going well? Well, I think distance really doesn't matter. It's a matter of communication. We work, almost all of our clients are remote, so our main markets are Switzerland and Australia. We have a few clients in Asia, and we have a few in the city. But it doesn't mean that the project that is far away is going to work worse than a project where people are really close. It's a matter of how we manage a project. There are projects that really need people to be on site, and there are projects where it doesn't make any difference. And today, all the tools we have to actually communicate, how can I say, they compensate for the distance. So it still really works. We have some clients that come on site and do specific trainings for our team. So we have one client, for example, that has a team of 16 people with us. They've been working with us for 6 years. They've come twice in 6 years to work with us, and we've never had a single problem with working with them remotely for so long. So, but it requires that both sides communicate and both sides are organized in the best possible way. And this is also something we help our clients with, is to put the right structure for them to work well. And this takes a little bit of organization. And Sarah mentioned that she has the same question as Serge. She always thought that it's better to have developers not far away to control better, but after collaborating with local providers, I see that it's also not easy to control and push. They never follow deadlines. Well, yeah, you can have a very good local provider, you can have a very bad local provider, you can have a very good outsourced partner that is very far away, and you can have a very bad one. So it's, I think distance doesn't matter. What matters is how they are organized and what their experience is. Now once you're set with what you want to build, now and later, it's time to look at the architectural design. So, well, okay, what you're seeing on the screen is a very simple example, but developers must think about how they will put the system in place, along with the architecture, with the architect in charge of the project, so the CTO or the senior architect. Along with the estimated development time, your developers should produce this architectural diagram where they could explain to you how the systems will interact together. And this work of thinking of the architecture of the system needs to be done no matter what. and it's better to do it as early as possible. And of course, it might be reviewed as the time goes. And so did you guys plan the architectural design, or if not, have you struggled with the architecture later in your project? And that was a question at the beginning with Nelly. I think it was Nelly or Katerina who asked about the good size for a startup to develop. So it depends on what the MVP, right? In terms of hours, the final hours for building your MVP, and then depending on your deadlines, yeah, that's when you really know when you want to size your team. And so this is maybe when you really want to scale from 1 to 2 coding founders to a few developers and ship the MVP within 2 to 4 months. Usually that's what we see with startups. It's like there's one guy inside the company or 2 guys that are managing the core stuff. And then for 4 months, they're like, okay, now we got to build this. It's X amount of hours. And so it's this amount of people for 3-4 months, and then find people to ramp up. And so this is really one of the options where outsourcing can be the most useful. So because you can add a few developers to ship your product and easily reduce the team size after the initial launch if you don't have enough cash to maintain an entire team. And the competition doesn't wait for you to be done. So here, when you know what to do, then that's when you should fire. And so what we've noticed with the years is that when you ramp up your team, you should really watch out for project managers. Even as a big company, we try to avoid them as much as possible. We need them when clients are not technical to make a buffer between the business and the developers, because a communication mismatch and crazy added features issue can really often happen. But we usually recommend our technical clients to directly talk to our lead developer, who will do 10-20% of his time as PM, which is always, anyway, has to be done by speaking with the PM if there's a PM. So, and we really noticed that doing like that makes projects much more efficient. And adding layers in a project can most of the time increase the risks of errors when relaying the specifications. And so, regardless of who you're working with, you want to make sure that your team is using the proper tools to manage a project. So, in our case, we use and which is really like the standard of, or the golden standard of project management, software development projects. And we even have a tool, for example, that automatically uploads the user stories we have created for our estimation. So we build a specific in-house software for that. And it uploads the task with the estimated times and creates a task for each developer that is going to work on the project. And so like this, we can organize projects, phases, know if we are on track compared to what we have estimated, understand the problems, and correct them as quickly as possible. And so our clients and the project managers, they have constant access to this information, so they see every second. And they receive daily updates where they can check the discrepancies and understand where the team struggles and fix it together before it's too late. Alexei mentioned that all the others say project managers are necessary to translate from human to coder's language. No, no, that's the job of the requirements. And then the requirements are the non-technical languages that coders will read and will interpret into technical things. But it depends. For some extremely complex project, integration projects where a real expertise is needed for extremely complex integration software, etc., project managers might be useful, but not for a startup that is a team of 3 or 4 that is launching their product. This is usually like whenever there's project manager, the chances of having a project manager that is not technical, I mean a real developer, that's where the project takes more time. can get sidetracked. We really think it's not the best. We could charge a lot more if we added project managers, but we don't think it's sufficient. Yeah, so for the tools, don't just use Skype and emails. It's usually messy. You have tools that allow you to manage projects such as Jira, Asana, Trello. One of the most underestimated functions in a software project is testing and the value of a professional tester. And so if there is no tester, who is going to do the testing? Because developers, they can test so far, but if I am coding my stuff, then I'm like, I've done the best job ever, so why would I even look at it again? So the founders will end up spending a lot more time doing testing, and while the functional testing can be well done by founders, a lot of other aspects can be missed. And so professional testers usually specifically train for this task, and they add a lot of value in saving some development time and increasing the quality of the shipped product. And in addition, testers use standardized, I'm doing two things at the same time I shouldn't be doing. So in addition, testers they use standardized practices to handle their tasks quickly, with writing test cases, executing them, writing bug reports with how to reproduce issues. So this actually saves a lot of time for developers and costs for the founders. And the tool for Jira is this one. It's an Australian company. They've made an IPO recently. They're like, I've been using them for more than, I think, 10 years. They're pretty awesome. It's super customizable. It's a complex project. This is really for professionals. You have other tools that you can use if you have simple projects, but this is like the state of the art. And what about the documentation of software development is not well done, impossible to change developers, sometimes even record all. Yes and no. Documentation is extremely important. So there are two kinds of documentation. Is like in the code. So that's something people don't do often. Is like explain functions in the code itself, so that whoever is going to take over the code, if it's a colleague or another company, then they can find out faster. And there are like additional documentation on the side, and this is also very, very important for passing along the project to someone else. We rarely had to tell a customer they had to throw away their project or their code because the documentation was not done. We've taken over a lot of projects that were really, really not documented, that were messy, not so well coded, but it doesn't mean that we need to recode. We need to recode when we don't have access to the full source code, and I will talk about this later, or if it's an old, not maintained technology or a proprietary technology that no one knows, and I will talk about this in a few minutes as well. Okay, so then when you have an MVP or sort of an MVP that you can push, that you think your users can use, do it. Don't wait it to be perfect, but it needs to be usable and not turn off users. So then when you push it to them, you got to make sure that you watch them use your software and talk to them to understand what they do, why they do it, what is missing, etc. Then fix what doesn't work until you get real stickiness. Depending on the business model, this means whether they keep using it or even if they're willing to pay something for it. But don't spend too much on marketing until you get something that really works. Otherwise, you'll simply really throw money out of the window. And so let's talk about the outsourcing best practices or working with an agency near you. The same thing. But if you decide to work with an outsourcing provider and or freelancers in another country to reduce costs, you have to be very careful with the differences between the countries. So there's a way to work with each culture, and if you don't understand that and manage different people the way you do with people in your own culture, you may not end up having the results you expect and even have misunderstandings. And so you better make sure you understand who you're working with and their culture. So about this, there's an interesting book. There's a link that probably Nelly or Caterina will share about when cultures collide. And so did you guys experience cultural issues in your project so far? Or how have you worked around them? Or have you stopped working with someone that with some people because you thought you were having too many communication issues, and were they in another from another culture? And one thing, funnily, I didn't have questions about this. Maybe I will now. I just wanted to add something about fixed price projects. And so I know that most people like the idea to have a fixed cost project to mitigate the risks. But with years of experience, we, as a company and the majority of the industry, have experienced that it really works only in the cases where the project is extremely well defined. So this works, for example, for small and well-defined mobile applications. But for the rest, really, it really works because there's always someone losing. And so if, like in most cases it happens, a provider underestimates a project. We talked about this. So not enough requirements, not senior enough, or not the right processes, or misunderstandings on the requirements you provided. Once the provider has spent the amount of hours he said he would spend, he's going to start cutting corners, decrease the quality of the product, and after a while he probably will ask you for more money, otherwise he ditches the project. So then this really can kill you. So you have to be very careful with that. And on the other hand, if the provider has overbilled you, he will earn a lot of money on your project and you'll lose. This rarely happens because if you do your job in evaluating the right provider and evaluate 3 to 4 providers, this shouldn't happen to you. And usually providers for fixed price, they will give you a low price to get the project and trick you later by asking more money because this and this and that was not in the requirements. And if you want to have it, then you need to pay more. That's when InMind will share also a little ebook that I wrote about evaluating provider, be it close to you or far away. And so in addition, in fixed price projects, provider will try to limit the collaboration with you because it takes a lot of time and they want to avoid the client to try to add features along the way that are not in the initial scope. So this results in loss of flexibility, which is usually vital for a startup. Sorry, I was reading the question at the same time from Max. Fixed price project, it's not profitable for outsourcers, or they just refuse to do more things at some point, even the product is not usable. If the project is well defined, extremely well defined, and the provider gives a price and does what he says he will do, and you get the product, then everyone's winning. Or maybe you paid a bit too much money, I don't know. But if they have developed what you've asked, and they burn the hours, and you feel like there's stuff that is not in there that you have asked but is nowhere to be seen in the contract or in the requirements you've given, then they won't do it. They will ask you for more money. So this is why there's so many risks, because you probably will want to change a few things along the way, and maybe you've forgotten stuff, and of course if you've forgotten stuff you will have to pay more. But if you have not well specified your project but they've done their job, they've done their job. So even if you can't use the product, right? So it's a bit tricky, fixed price projects. It's very tricky, and usually providers, most providers would be able to tell you if it's possible to do it fixed price or not. This is why you need to ask 3 or 4 different providers and ask for their opinion on a project. But what you also need to do is make sure that they're reputable providers. Because if you ask 3 bad providers, then they can maybe all give you the same answer. Oh yeah, I will do it, no problem. And then whichever you pick, you're going to fail. So you need to make sure that you check the references of your providers. You call a few of their clients, maybe 2 or 3, and you talk with them and you ask them all the questions that you need to know. And so, the question I wanted to ask you is, did you have good or bad experiences with fixed cost projects? And if you could share some, it would be great for the people that are attending. And if you have any additional question, you should absolutely ask them. And another thing that we see very often is clients that come to us because they have problems with their current provider, who actually have built their entire system on a proprietary framework on their own. So this is a big issue because most of the time it's an outdated technology, and it's very, very hard to work on these projects without having to restart from scratch. We see many companies that are having this problem. Their provider build their own system, and then no one wants to take over because no one knows the technology, and it's taking a lot of time to learn on that. And usually developers don't want to learn stuff that is just tied to one small company where they would never be able to use it in their career later. So you have to make sure that you work on a technology your provider is proficient with, but that is also widespread, with a striving community that is up to date, and that will be easy to hand over. So this is one of the few steps to keep yourself more independent from a single provider or a single freelancer. You have to make sure what technologies they're using, and maybe ask people you know that can advise you about this particular framework or coding language. Another issue we see sometimes that some clients do not have complete control over the source code, and so when the relationship with their provider goes a little weird, the providers they simply cut access to their latest source code. So if you never get the code back, it can take a few hard months of work to save the project, and of course delay the shipping of a product, or miss out on a lot of revenues from new features that have been paid for already, but you don't have access to them. So make sure you have your own big lab or GitLab, for example. Very, very, very important. Also, you have to put in clauses in your contract to keep your team members on board if you're working with a team on your project. So usually, not usually, but a lot of providers put their A team for you at the beginning of a project, then they switch to more junior people. And so at the beginning, you're like, wow, it's awesome. And then a few months down the road, it's like, what the hell is happening? So if you're in a monthly contract, the provider should commit to keep the developers on the project, or compensate when they change for some reason, because there's a learning curve for each project. And so a real partner will work with you to develop the people in the project and make sure you get the most out of your relationship and the learning of the people. So you think about an extension of your own employees that stay with you on the long term. And so you have to understand what the provider does to make sure they will do everything to reduce the attrition rate of their teams. And yeah, what I mentioned before, and I will go a bit deeper into that, is that you really have to be organized in a project. So this is valid for you if you're developing your own stuff, or this is valid in a relationship with a provider, and this should be done by the provider itself. So in our case, we have daily and weekly reports. We use project management tools. There's no 24 hours where our clients don't know what we're doing and that are not informed about if there's an issue or we see delays coming, stuff like that. You have to know right now and right then. I'm just reading a comment from Alexi. Um, Sarah Max, we had this case with fixed pricing. Finally, it was very tricky, as Fred has said. After fulfilling the work according to our requirements, requirements provider told we finish thanks, but the issue was that in requirements it was not considered an important feature in the main code. Yeah, that's the thing. Um, Alexis said it all. Is like if you forget something, um, then you forgot it, and you probably have to pay more. And one other thing is to always have a high-level architect involved in the project. So if he's the architect of the provider, really make sure that he has the experience required for the job, as really bad architectural choices can create issues down the road. If you're not sure about the skills of your architect or one of the provider, you can hire someone a few hours to validate the architecture of the solution. It costs you a few $100, but it can really save you a lot of hassles down the road. You're just gonna verify everything before the coding. Whatever you spend to fix a problem before you code, it saves you from 10 to 1,000 times more money than if you have to fix an issue when it's been coded and deployed. So an issue that costs you $1 to fix in the design, for example, if it's not solved in the design and you have to correct it once it's coded, it might as well cost you $1,000. Basically, that's the difference it can go to. And so going back to the questions about the coding CTO, so one thing we really look at when we work with a startup, and even more importantly when we invest in one, is that we want to make sure that they have a coding CTO. So the CTO has to be technical. That's Chief Technical Officer or Chief Technology Officer. He has to know technology. He has to put his hands in the code because it adds a lot of value to the project and also to the startup when you want to raise funds. It means that, at least on paper, that technology is key in-house and that the knowledge is mastered in-house as well. And so this person, she should establish coding standards super early to make sure everyone is coding the same way, which in turn facilitates onboardings and transitions. And the coding CTO should do frequent code reviews. It's been scientifically proven to be the best investment you can do to increase the quality of your product, but also to train your team as quickly as possible. So this is extremely, extremely important. And this is also helping the team to stick together and share experiences, points of view, and fast-track their development. So it's really a mentoring tool as well. Serge is asking a question. Not sure you mentioned this point, but how does it work to make cost evaluation for soft project and compare suppliers? It comes down to the estimation. When your suppliers, they cut down the project in many user stories, in many small tasks, first you can verify that they've quoted for everything, and then if you give the same specifications to everyone, you should have more or less the same detail in the proposal. I know that a lot of providers, they just like put big chunks of money. This is $10,000, this is $5,000, this is $50,000, whatever. But you have the right to know how they're going to spend that money and what are they going to do with it and how much time do they think it's going to take for whatever feature. So if you have a unified way to estimate the project, then that's when you can really make the difference. I used to be a purchasing manager for a private bank and an insurance company, and that's what we would do. We would always make sure that you can compare apples with apples and not apples with oranges in different offers you're given. But this is why I said 3 to 4 providers, because if you do more than that, it's gonna take so much time. That's why you have to narrow down to a few good providers so you can ask them really deep questions and really make your due diligence. Sarah is mentioning that the beginning providers estimated the cost of the MVP as near 20K, but at the end you paid over 50K and still need some development work to be done. So was this because the features were not well, the requirements were not precise enough, or maybe you added features down the road? So that's always like there's two things, right? These missed requirements and then added features that, of course, will bloat the price of the MVP. And Alexi, how to estimate the time developers really spend for coding? How can we really control it and be sure whether they spent 1 hour or 10 hours of this or that feature? Well, this goes down to, okay, the reporting can say, I've spent 8 hours to do this, but in reality, you might think, okay, they just logged 8 hours for that thing, but they've been like spending 6 hours drinking coffee and 2 hours actually coding. Well, you know, when you're working with a provider, at some point you gotta trust them, and this is when you do your due diligence and ask other clients of them how their experience is going, or you can put in place, if you are technical enough, you can put in place measurements. For example, we have one of our most technical clients that our team loves working with. Because he's doing code reviews, he's super well organized, but he's also giving extremely detailed measurements about the productivity of the guys, and then so he can compare each one of the developers working for him according to a standard way to the productivity, like the amounts of features developed during a certain period of time, and then the quality of the code that is done by the amount of bugs that he can find later in the code that the developers have done. So there are many ways to know, but and many tools. But if you're not technical, you have to trust your provider on that one, because the provider is the employer of those developers, and me as an employer, I want to make sure that my staff is working well and that my clients are happy. So I have a vested interest in both the amount of code that our guys do and the happiness of my client. And in our company, developers are evaluated at the end of each sprint. So every 2 weeks, they are evaluated on their productivity, on their proactivity, on the quality of what they've been doing, and the client is also asked every 2 weeks, how did it go? Are the features developed? Did you get what you wanted? How is the quality, etc. So it's very, very narrow room for missing something. Serge is asking a question. Nowadays, hacking and IT security is very important to be considered for all softwares. How do you deal with those aspects and make sure it's hackers proof reasonably? Well, it's about having the right training for the developers, making sure that the architect also is choosing the right technologies to work with, and of course, it also comes down to performance and security testing by the testers to make sure that the software is reasonably safe. Roberto, my developer says he's coding all the night long and reports many hours to be spent, but I can't really control it. How do you manage the tasks of your developer? If you have small user stories and discuss about small features, then you will be able to measure the daily output of a developer. Let me find, if I have a daily report that I can share with you. I'll paste it in the chat. I don't know if I have anything that you can I have a developer here. Usually I don't keep them. No. Okay, I'll try to find some. Ah, yes, I have one. It's a PDF. Maybe I can briefly share my screen for you guys to see what the report should look like. Can I share my screen? There. Okay, no, I need to install a software, additional software, but basically you have to be able to see at the task level what everyone is doing with their stuff. And Nelly, yes, I can give you a PDF. I would need just to remove the name of the client, and then I can send the example later. Another question from Sarah is, how many years of experience at the minimum should a CTO have? It doesn't really matter so much about how many years the CTO should have. It's about more like the skills he has and the experience he has. Some people with 20 years of experience are probably, some of them are worse than someone who just has 5 years of experience that has been working on breakthrough technology. So it's mostly the types of experience he has got over the years. Slide 30. And so there's one thing that you have to keep in mind is that the cost of a delayed MVP, they're really enormous. And so this is something people are really often underestimating. So you really need to be ruthless when removing features. Every day your product doesn't hit the markets has a financial cost for missed revenues, the cost of paying your developers to get stuff done, unpaid founders when they don't get salaries, and how about your competitors gaining traction while you're still in development and haven't shipped anything? Sarah is asking about an opening vacancy for CTO. What is the main thing you should put down? Any recommendations? I don't know at what stage you're at, so I can't really give you any specific answer right now. But maybe that's something we could have a look at. If you explain to me a little bit where you're at, what technology you're working on, what you're expecting from your CTO. Do you have enough money to pay him full time? What are your plans for the future? And by the way, if any one of you is a CTO and could help Sarah, it would be great. Okay, next slide. Still about the delayed cost. The cost of a delayed MVP. The goal is, as I mentioned a few times, is don't try to build the best product in the world and fine-tune it over and over, right? You have to ship something, and you can look at the quote from Reid Hoffman, which is saying that if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched too late. And I can give you a few examples for it's about building stuff that doesn't scale, but that you can test. And for example, Stripe, which is a payment company, when they launched, they created a merchant accounts for their clients very quickly by doing stuff manually to see if they had traction. So they were giving the impression that they had a super amazing software that was helping them open merchant account right away. But actually, every time they got a request by email or whatever, they were just faxing papers to create merchant accounts, and actually only launched their automated onboarding many months later. So, but in the meantime, they took the market and they crushed the competition. And for example, also Airbnb, for the first 3 years, the CEO was living at host places in California, and he became an advocate of his company and really knew the clients extremely well. And there's a few links that in mind will share also about some inspiration about a series of blitzscaling on YouTube. So it's how to quickly grow your startup, and this has been done by like the startup founders from California for Airbnb, Stripe. Don't remember if the guy from Uber is there, but like all the big names, they talk about a few topics that are really interesting. And maybe for Sarah also, one of the blitz scaling stuff probably will give you more information about hiring a CTO. I'm sure you can find a much better answer than I could give you actually in this video. And a few books that I also kind of like. It's a really different books, but it's the story of Elon Musk by Ashley Vance. So you can see that reading this book was a really a big pleasure, because it's completely insane the way this guy, how entrepreneurial he is, and how he does things, and how he builds stuff, and how incredible what he does is. And another one that disrupted my misadventure in the startup bubble is the story of a guy, I think that was working for a newspaper that joined HubSpot, and it kind of also tells all the crazy shit that startups are doing, and all the bad sides of the startup world as well. And I think those two are really interesting to read. And one last slide about us is how do we actually help startups? And so you probably have understood that Arcanys was a software development company, and now we've launched a program that is called Arcanys Labs. We invest up to $200,000 worth of services and cash, so it's a blend of up to $100,000 in software development and UI services, and up to $100,000 in cash that is given by our venture capital partner in Switzerland. And so we can really take any project from the requirements phase to the launch, and we also help running clients with their infrastructure, with a technical support team, and e-commerce companies and e-commerce startups with a customer support team that is also working 24/7. You can see that we also have project managers for some projects when it's really needed, and all the other skills that you need to actually launch your product, or to extend the team and go faster in developing it. And so we do this in exchange of stakes, and what we want to do is help startups really scale super quickly to help them release stuff quickly on the market. And one last thing I want to share with you as a little bonus is a little ebook where I grabbed the common startup mistakes that have been shared by a lot of startup guys from the Silicon Valley, and so that's also interesting to see, like, what are the main mistakes to actually avoid, and it gives a few insights on maybe where you're at and what you're struggling with as well. So okay, there you go. And I just wanted to make sure that you had no more questions. If you do, please feel free to write them down, or if some things are come up later, again, you can contact us, and either Katarina, Nelly, or me will get back to you with more of the answer. And now I think it's time to thank you all for your participation. Here are my contact details, and I'm going to give back the mic to Katarina, and I wish you all a great weekend. Thank you.
So thank you, Fred. That was a really very informative webinar. Thanks everyone, all the listeners, for your active participation. We saw really lots of questions today, and yeah, thank you, Frederic, for answering all of them. That was really great for us as well, just to hear lots of new insights. So we are inviting, if you have any other questions, we're inviting you to write to us or directly to Frederic. He shared his details in the beginning, and I guess our moderators now will help you and provide once again the links to just to contact Frederic. At the same time, I would like to remind you about our next webinars that we're having this month. So next Wednesday, we have the second webinar in our series about user experience and neuromarketing. So it will be the team of Portuguese company who is providing user experience services. Quite an interesting insight for those who are interested in that. And then the next week after that, me and Nelly will be speaking about startups and investors and how the communication is happening between those two groups, let's say. What to prepare for the presentation, how to make a pitch, and other things that might be helpful for you as a startup when you're communicating with the investor. So Nelly, could you please, yes, Nelly has already shared the link to the website, to our website with calendar of next webinars. And one more webinar that will be held in March. It will be in the end of March, the webinar about marketing for startups. The details will be published very soon, next week. So just you can sign up and you can follow for more details. And yes, if you're a startup, if you are developing your product, you can always, we invite you to register at InMind, where you can meet potential partners. You can also share news about your product, and you can find investors and other service providers like Arcanys and Arcanys Labs. So I guess we are finishing for today. Thank you all for coming for today on the weekend on Saturday morning, and we'll be happy to see you very soon.